So tonight we're going to cover methodology, and where we're going to start out is the pen test execution standard. And so this is just kind of a way of doing pen test. You need a methodology when you're pen testing. And what that does is that's going to make sure you're doing a thorough pen test. It's going to make sure that you're doing a repeatable process. So every time you do a pen test, you should be, similar in quality. You're making sure you're testing everything. You're following the same set of rules every time. And to kind of show you who, and you can just find this website is pentest-standard.org is where you can find that. And I'm going to post that in the chat so you can get to that. So this is a really good resource this works for web app pen testing as well as network pen testing. And so some of the people that created this standard are some of the most well-known people in the industry. They are very well-known people. Most of them work in consulting or have worked in consulting. A lot of these people own their own companies. So they got together and created this standard so that way other people could follow the standard to be able to produce, good quality pen tests and have a methodology to follow. So some of the people here is Chris Nickerson. He's the CEO of Lars Consulting. They're a boutique pen test firm. And when I say boutique pen test firm, they basically specialize in pen testing. So they're really well known. Dave Kennedy, he owns the company Trusted Sec and also has a company called Binary Defense. That's more of the blue team side, more of the defensive side, more of the monitoring and detection. Then Chris Riley and some other people. Let me look down a little further. Chris Gates, he's pretty well known in the industry. He used to work for Lars Consulting. I think he works internally for a company leading a red team. Joe McCrae, he is a consultant and he also does training. So he teaches pen testing training, I think for himself and also for another company. And then Carlos Perez, he was working for Tenable Security, which is the creators of the Nessus vulnerability scanner, but he now works for Trusted Sec. And then John Strand, if you've heard of Black Hills Information Security Group, they're like a very well-known security consulting company. He used to also be a SANS instructor. Let's see who else. So a lot of people that are really, really well known in the industry. So this kind of gives you some idea of who created this standard. It's not only does this show you the steps involved in doing a pen test, it's got some technical guidelines. So it will tell you the different tools and stuff required to do a pen test. So if you're wanting to learn about, wireless pen test or network pen test, the different tools are listed on this page. So you can see tools required. They show the different operating systems. I know a lot of times you see pen testers using Linux, but pen testers also use Mac OS and Windows. We use VirtualBox and VMware to virtualize our pen testing operating systems. And so they show some different radio frequency tools here. So this would be for your Wi-Fi pen testing. And then even like USB GPSs, when you're doing a pen test for Wi-Fi, we'll use UPS GPSs sometimes. And what this GPS does is you can map the Wi-Fi hotspots to a map. So you could use something like Google Maps and map out your hotspots and create a heat map for tracking those. And so this covers intelligence gathering. So some of the different tools, you get into OSINT, they show some different legal sites there for different states, which is a good thing to know. If you're doing a pen test for another country, you need to be aware of the rules in that country, make sure you're not breaking any laws. But usually when you're working for a pen testing company, they take care of those things, but it's not a bad thing to understand that on your own. And so this is a good place to find these resources. And so all this is just pretty much technical, but they show different intelligence gathering tools. Then also here we get more of the tools. So metadata leakage, FOCA, which is a Windows tool. Some other tools listed through here. This is kind of the resource I'm not sure when it was last updated, but the methodology still, some of these tools may have changed and improved. And so we get into here, we see some things related to web application pen tests. So we see SQL injection and cross-site scripting and cross-server request forgery. So we see these different types of attacks in here. So this is outside of the methodology, but this goes through and gives you some of the technical items that you may need help with on a pen test. So we have these main sections here: pre-engagement interactions, intelligence gathering, threat modeling, vulnerability analysis, exploitation, post-exploitation, and reporting. Reporting is usually people's least favorite part of doing a pen test, because who likes having to write? But this is what you give your customer or your employer to show that you performed a pen test. This is where you document the vulnerabilities that you find during the pen test and how to remediate those. So we'll kind of dig into this. As you're starting out as a pen tester, a lot of these things someone else will be guiding for you, and you'll just kind of be on the calls when you're getting ready to start the pen test or scoping a pen test. You may be on the call, but this is going to be the engagement leads, project managers, people that are running the projects, and management will be dealing with most of these. I mean, there's different areas that we get involved in as pen testers. So you have like introduction to scope. So you need to scope the pen test and show what's supposed to be in the pen test. So you have like a scoping meeting before you give a quote for the pen test, or if you're as an internal employee, then you're going to define what's going to be tested, what's not going to be tested, and you always want to stay in scope. Once, if you're doing a pen test and you get out of scope, you could accidentally take down a system, and people usually get upset over that. So there's different things. So you're basically figuring out during the pre-engagement phase, you're figuring out how many hours it's going to take to do the pen test, and hourly rate. Usually you'll base your rate, your pen test, on the number of hours and how much you charge per hour. And then there's questionnaires. So when you're scoping this pen test, there's different questions that you're going to ask. And so some of the ones you'll see for network pen test: why is the customer having the pen test done against their environment? Is the pen test required for specific compliance requirements? So a lot of times for PCI, your payment card industry, DSS, this is a requirement. So these are the things you want to make sure that you ask during the pre-engagement meetings. You want to make sure if this is for PCI, there's certain things that need to be done. And so you want to test the hours that it can be tested. So a lot of times companies don't want you to do the scanning during business hours, so they may require it after hours, on weekends. And there's different, hours even on the weekend that you may be allowed to test. So say like if you're doing a test for a bank, they may be open till 3 o'clock or maybe noon on Saturday and closed on Sunday. So they're going to base the testing hours around their hours of business, because they don't want something to happen to impact their customers' experience with their web app. If someone's trying to do the banking, they don't want the system to crash on them. So here you're going to test how many IP addresses are being tested. So this way you're going to be able to quote how long it's going to take to do the pen test. And are there any are there any devices in places that may impact the results of a penetration test, such as a firewall, intrusion detection, prevention systems, web application firewalls, or load balancers? So in this case, if you're doing a web application pen test, you may want them to set up rules so your traffic's not being blocked. Because the reason this being is when you're doing a pen test, you want to make sure that it's secure. And if they're blocking you from testing, what happens if those firewalls go down? Or if an attacker can figure out how to bypass those firewalls, then there's vulnerabilities that an attacker can exploit. So that's what you need to test like that. And if you're doing like a network pen test from the internet, you need to have them to allow your IP address for the pen test, as well as them know your IP address, so that way they know that it's you testing the site and not some malicious hacker. Because if it's some bad guy, they want to be able to block them. If it's you, they really want to know where this is coming from. And so web application pen tests, since this is more what we're focusing on this semester, So how many web applications are being assessed, how many login systems are being assessed, how many static pages, how many dynamic pages. So this is the way you're going to quote the pen test. Will the source code be made readily available? And so if they have the source code, this is a better way to pen test the application. We won't be doing source code review in this class, but this is one of the things that is done sometimes, as well as logging into the applications to test. Just like you have the firewalls that prevent you from testing, you want to make sure that you're able to log in, because maybe that system is hard for you to hack into. And if you don't have login credentials, then you can't test very far in the environment. And so will there be any kind of documentation? So if there's any kind of documentation, maybe the developers may have documents on how they develop the application. So the more information you have, the quicker it is going to be for you to be able to do the pen test, and the more thoroughly you'll be able to pen test the application. And so will static analysis be performed in this application? And so this is usually where you're doing static analysis against the source code, which most of the times in your pen test, it's going to be dynamic. So you're running a vulnerability scanner and doing testing against that. Does the client want fuzzing performed against the application? And usually some of these questions are kind of, I think maybe because this document's a little bit older, typically you're going to perform fuzzing. Usually the types of testing a customer is not going to want you to do is denial of service testing, because if their application or their systems are vulnerable to denial of service, then you document that in a report, but you don't necessarily test that. So you're not going to test that in the real world to see if that can happen, because you don't want to take the system down. And so you'll just document if it's vulnerable. There are some exploits that are denial of service exploits. So you want to be careful not to use those against your target you're testing. So does the client want role-based testing performed against the application? So this is using different levels of access. So you're testing like your admin login, like a regular banking customer, maybe other functions, within the application. So you test all those different roles. So what happens, you want to see if a regular user can do things that an administrator can do, which they shouldn't be able to. And so you test to make sure that you can't perform those activities. So does the client want credential scans against the web applications performed? Typically, you're going to do that. That's kind of, having your login credentials, that's kind of a better way to test the application more thoroughly. When you do pen tests against networks, you don't usually do that with credentials, although there is a type of pen test called an assumed breach, because sometimes people that are trying to gain unauthorized access may be internal employees. So it's not always someone outside of the company. And so that covers kind of the pre-engagement stuff. And so this, you're just looking at the scoping, and you just understanding the scope is really what we're going to need from a pen tester standpoint. But then intelligence gathering. So you're gathering information on the websites, on the networks. And for a web app pen test, there's some of these things we're not going to be doing. We're doing, possibly doing Google searches to see if there's any information leakage. We're running different vulnerability scanners, network vulnerability scanners as part of our testing. But some of these things are more specific to, if you're doing social engineering, you're going to do a lot of OSINT, open source intelligence gathering. So you're looking at business information, you're looking for physical locations, because if you're doing a physical pen test, then you're going to need to know the location, and you're going to need to be able to collect data, because for like a physical pen test, which is not part of a web app pen test, this may require going on site and seeing if you can get into the building without authorization. So this is testing needs to be done too, because your application may be really secure, your network may be really secure, but if your location is not physically secure, then it's going to be a lot easier for someone to get into the building and gain access to data that needs to be remain private and available only to a certain group of people. It's also a thing where you don't cover as much in web app pen testing. And so when you get into your footprinting, So banner grabbing, you're going to do this to see what kind of web application you're running. Let's see, some of this DNS Discovery, typically not part of a web application pen test. Within your web application discovery, this is going to get more specific into what we're doing. And so the more information you gather, the more thoroughly you're going to be able to test that system. And so sometimes just knowing the version of the web application server, then we can see if it's vulnerable. So for instance, if they're running IIS, which is Microsoft's web server, then we can go over to exploit DB and see if there's any exploits for it. And so for your web app pen test, sometimes the opportunity for really good exploits where you're getting system level access doesn't always happen. But so if we come to this site and we find out that from our intelligence gathering that this site is running Microsoft IIS, then we can come over to this website, exploit DB, and we can go in here and see if there's any exploits, which exploiting is basically hacking the system. A exploit is exploit code or a way to hack into that system. So as I was mentioning before, that there's denial of service exploits or vulnerabilities. This is a denial of service. So we're not going to want to test that on our systems, because that's going to go through. Now we could just, if we get the certain information that shows it's vulnerable, then we could show that this particular version of IIS is vulnerable to denial of service, although we're not going to do denial of service. And the more information you do in your search, the more it's going to get it down to what you're trying to exploit. And so this one right here is a authentication bypass if the Microsoft IIS server is running PHP. So this has been tested on Windows Server 2003, which is kind of outdated, but you'll still run into this in environments. A lot of times, people will say, you're not going to see XP and those kind of things. I did a pen test in the end of 2018, the beginning of 2019, and this company was still running Windows XP. It was like a Fortune 100 company. So vulnerable software operating systems and are ways that you can get into systems. So this is a way to look up some exploits. And so like when you do your banner grabbing, this is how we identify the version of the web server and what's running on it. And so you kind of get into some business relationships. This is more of your OSINT stuff that would use for social engineering or a full scope pen test. When you're trying to emulate more of an adversary, then you get into more of the OSINT. So basically what we're going to be doing on our intelligence gathering is we're going to be doing vulnerability scanning, and we're going to do different types of scans and collecting information on the system. And then threat modeling. So threat modeling is more important the more complex system you get into, because like if we're doing a web app pen test or we're doing a network pen test, we're going to realize that this is accessible from the internet. It's running these types of services, so we're going to know the attack vectors. If you're doing something like, I used to work for US Bank, and we used to have we had a third-party company that did our ATM pen tests. And some of the things you take in consideration when you're doing a threat model is, where's this ATM machine located at? If that ATM machine was located in Manhattan, New York, downtown, you're not going to be as worried about physical access to that as if it was like in East Texas on an abandoned highway with no traffic at night. You're going to have to worry about physical access because people are going to have more opportunity to try to physically breach that system. So those are the things that you take into play: the environment where that system's located at, Now, if this is a ATM within a hotel, less likely, there's still the opportunity, still the chance physical attacks, but less likely than if you're out in the middle of nowhere. So you take in effect your environment, the attack vectors, and then you plan out your threat model. So this helps you more thoroughly test your application or device that you're testing. And so that gets into, that's good to know threat modeling, but that is something that you get into more advanced pen testing. So like normally on a pen test, you're doing intelligence gathering, you're doing vulnerability analysis, exploitation, and the other steps. So here we're getting into like active testing, and they're showing like automated. So we're like doing port scans. So right here, they just kind of show you, you're using tools like Nmap, which you tell if the ports are open or closed. And this is still things that you'll do on a web app pen test, but normally your port scanning is something that you always do on a network pen test. It's a good idea to do on your web application pen test, but it's not always, in scope or a needed activity. But with some of these things we're covering, is just kind of universal pen test, across different types of devices and systems. So web application scanners, so you'll run like a web application vulnerability scan against your target. You'll try to do directory listing and brute forcing. So sometimes you can find directories on an application that may have sensitive data there. There may be, there's not proper permissions on there. Maybe you're able to get access to data. Could be credit card information, private identifiable information on your customers, and that sort of thing that you can find through this. You see web server version vulnerability identification. So just like we went and looked at IIS, this is the reason you want to know for the vulnerability detection. And so some of the different things that you can find that are vulnerable are your different HTTP methods. So if you're able to do a put or delete on there, and these are like HTTP methods, this is like you'd have to, executing from Burp Suite or from the command line. If you do a put, you're able to upload a file. If you're doing a delete, you're able to delete files, which this is risky because I could upload a file to that system that could give me shell access to that application. If I'm able to delete it, I'm able to, I could take the application down or delete important components of the web page. And so exploitation, this is when you find your vulnerabilities and you're trying to go in and exploit the application. And so they're showing some different countermeasures: antivirus, encoding, packing, encrypting, whitelist bypass. So sometimes you're able to bypass the restrictions on that site: process injection, pure memory resident, human, so web application firewalls. So there's ways to get around that. And so post-exploitation, this is what happens if you gain access to this system. Can I get access to another system? But keep in mind, you need to stay in scope. I've done web application pen tests before where I was able to get command line access to the server, but since it's a web application pen test, due to the scope, I couldn't test past that server. So you always want to stay in scope. And so you try to see if you can elevate privileges. If you're able to hack into that system, does that service account prevent you from getting to sensitive data, which it should. You should have your service accounts configured to where you can't get to, certain data. It's a service account should be just enough to run the web server or the application without, operating without giving too much access. Because if you give too much access, if it's running as admin, NT system authority or root, and you exploit that system and you gain control over that service account or the user account that's running that application server or web server, then you have that level access to the system. So you want to make sure that you keep your permissions set to the least needed permissions. And then you get into the reporting. And so in our reporting, you're going to, during your pen test, if you find something that's, here they got listed as extreme and high, these kind of terms are a little outdated. Most cases, they're going to call this is termed as critical, and this is termed as high. So if you're ever finding high or critical vulnerabilities during your pen test, you want to notify your customer or your employer, because if you found these vulnerabilities and they're exploitable, then a malicious hacker could do the same thing if they got access to it. So you want to report those as you're going along. You're wanting to rate the different vulnerabilities. So this is information security risk rating scale. So critical risk of security controls being compromised with the possibility of catastrophic financial losses occurring as a result. And then high is high risk security controls being compromised with the potential for significant financial loss occurring as a result. And then elevated, so this is usually typically what you're going to see is you're going to see critical, high, medium, low, and informational.
Okay.
Like a little pie chart like this showing the percentage of what was of what this was based on. So you can see some of the top categories you see as a pen tester. So missing patches, lack of application hardening. So this is just not securing the application well enough, lack of OS hardening, not securing the operating system, easy guessable credentials. So sometimes you'll see default credentials, say like Apache Tomcat is a Java application server, and their default credentials is Tomcat. So there's websites out there that have lists of the default credentials for the different applications. So if these are easy guessable or default credentials, then someone without access, without authorization to access that application, they can go through and access it. So then network design flaws. And so when you're going through, you're going to have the executive summary. And in the executive summary, you're going to explain at a high level so management understands. And not only is it management understands, it's a kind of a way to summarize what was found, because you could have had hundreds of findings and you just want to summarize by category. We found these type of findings, and put it in language that management can understand. And then you get into the technical report. And so the technical report, you'll go through and show the vulnerabilities you found, the details, how to remediate those vulnerabilities. They need to know how to fix it. Sometimes steps to duplicate what you did, so they can go back after they remediate. They can go back and see if it's still vulnerable. Then usually you go back and do a retest to make sure that those vulnerabilities don't still exist. And so you put screenshots within your report and kind of the different steps you followed. And methodology is a good one to put in a report. Usually you put what your methodology is based off of. So usually people use the P-test standard, and then like the OWASP top 10 for your web application vulnerability findings. So anyone have any questions so far?
And on the OS hardening,
Yes.
which is a situation where you run into that XP when you did the pen testing that you were telling us about.
Yeah. It could be outdated versions, and it could be just missing patches too, because even back at one time, like Windows 7, when Windows 7 was a supported version of an operating system, there were vulnerabilities out there, and if you didn't have the latest patches, then it was vulnerable. So OS hardening can include making sure your operating system is on a supported version, make sure you got all the patches, because sometimes, usually how systems are hacked into is because there's missing patches.
Yeah.
So OS hardening is going through making configurations, making sure that you're not, some of the things you can do with OS hardening, making sure that proper file permissions are set, so not just anyone can access the data. So I mean, that's like a whole thing in itself. So this is something you test during a network pen test, but it's also important during a web application pen test. So
Okay.
OS hardening is just hardening, securing the operating system. And as you mentioned, XP, that's an example of a system that would fail, that got exploited because the lack of OS hardening.
Yes, because it's no longer supported.
Yes.
Yeah, by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So what did you do? Did you tell them to change the OS, or find a way to patch it up?
In the report, we put the remediation to update to the latest version of Windows. But yeah, I was able to, through that vulnerable server, I was able to hack into it. There was an existing exploit for it that could be exploited. So I was able to exploit that system, and get into it because of that, because that outdated version. But what happens sometimes too is, like, you hear of your industrial control systems and SCADA systems. These are like systems that control like our water treatment plants and electric grids.
Yeah.
Sometimes those systems use.
I thought one just happened like a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
In some small town. Where
And
someone broke into their water treatment, the software that was running the water treatment management system. So
yeah, that's a good point. That stuff happens. And what happens is, a lot of times, water treatment facilities, electrical grids, manufacturing facilities, sometimes they have outdated operating systems because some of the software that runs those systems hasn't been updated. Maybe it's expensive, and they would have to, because what happens sometimes, those systems run embedded software. So it's like built into the hardware.
Yeah.
And it's a little more difficult to upgrade. So you see a lot of outdated stuff that way, but yeah, they say a lot of some cases, you can put other things in control and, different controls in place. So if you have if you can't update your operating system, then you need to make sure your firewall is blocking from the outside. You need to make sure you're controlling traffic internally that doesn't get to that. But yeah, that was a great example of how that could be exploited and what an OS hardening weakness is. And so, yeah, just looking back to that, just the different patches, and that's even software too. Software versions can be vulnerable. Your operating system, if it is, it could be secure. Maybe you've got the latest Windows patches running and that's secure. But if something happens, the software is not secure, you have to make sure everything is secure and up to date. Because a lot of times on your pen tests, even though, I always encourage, and a lot of pen testers will know how to do some web app pen testing, because if you're doing a network pen test, they may have antivirus, they may have their operating systems up to date. It may be hard to hack into the system, but a lot of times you'll find some Windows application, and sometimes there's different administrative consoles that runs like, maybe some print service, print server service, or some kind of management control for, some kind of security, some firewall or other devices is running on a web app. And sometimes those can be hacked and you can get in, even like the default credentials and stuff too.
Oh, okay. Like the APIs that they put on web applications.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Yeah, so some of those APIs have vulnerabilities that can be exploited, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes people don't secure APIs because they know it's that, if you're using an application, some applications will interact with APIs, and then, you're not maybe directly connecting to it. And some people think it's secure, but, you're still, if the API is not secure, then you can possibly hack that API. So, you really can't, you have to make sure everything is secure. And sometimes with your mobile applications, what happens is people are able to bypass controls because maybe the application, they may have to set the application security less restrictive for like a mobile application or an application that runs on a tablet.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't secure that well. And so you can do things like change your user agent. And a user agent is what your browser will show you how to render that web page. So, sometimes your web page is going to look different on a mobile device than it's going to look in your browser. And so sometimes, in the past, it would be less secure. Sometimes people make the web version less secure, and then you could use a user agent. I could make them look like my browser on my Windows system is an Android device running like Chrome or whatever, Android based browser, and it's going to let me access it as that. And sometimes that lets you bypass controls by accessing it as a mobile device.
Oh.
And we'll get into some user agents, show you what user agents. That's one way to test your application sometimes, because you could go through and sometimes there's special pages that may only be visible to certain types of devices. And so that's kind of how some of those things are controlled. So be able to change your user agent, because matter of fact, I've got a user agent switcher right here. You can see on my screen. So one of my pen testing tools here is I'm able to go in. So I'm running Mac OS, but I can come here and switch this and apply this. And so the web page is seeing this as a Windows device accessing the application.
Wow.
And so you can even change that to like mobile devices. Let's see. And there's several different ones. And so, yeah, we can go up here. We can see the different operating systems, and we're able to, iOS, we can make it look like we're accessing with an iOS application, like our mobile phone or our iPad. And so we could change, to Safari browser. And so we go in, look like we're on an iPhone running Safari browser. And so you can apply that, and then the web pages are rendered differently. And that's sometimes you can use that workaround. That was a workaround for a while. If you use Instagram, Instagram doesn't let you upload pictures from your computer. But one of the ways to work around that before is to change your user agent to make it look like a mobile phone or a tablet, and it would let you upload pictures. So that's kind of shows some examples of what the user agent will do. So sometimes we're able to bypass stuff by just using that different user agent. And so OWASP Top 10, we'll get into this in a little more detail in a future class, but this is a good one to look at here. The OWASP Top 10 is kind of the industry standard on vulnerabilities for web applications. There used to be another one called WASC, WASC, the Web Application Security Consortium. And that used to be one of the more popular ones, but OWASP gained popularity. This is a it's a nonprofit organization, and they create this set of vulnerabilities classified, and they base on what is the most popular, what's being seen more currently at the time, and it's broken down by different types of vulnerabilities. So they got the OWASP Top 10, and this is a good one to know if you're ever wanting to go into pen testing, whether it's a web app pen testing job or a network pen testing job. They're going to ask you questions in the OWASP Top 10. So just understanding the OWASP Top 10. So we can see these risks. So injection is a very popular one. This is the one SQL injection falls under. So we clicked on that and we're able to see more information on that. So it tells you about the vulnerability, how to prevent it, and different references. So this is a good free resource. I mean, so the OWASP website not only has the OWASP Top 10, they've got different information on how to secure your applications too. So not only do they show you how to test for security weaknesses, they also show you how to protect against those too. And this is periodically updated. So like the latest version is OWASP Top 10 2017, but there should be a newer, there'll probably be, I'm not sure when the next version is coming out, but they update that routinely. Before that, I think it was 2013. So every so many years, they update it based on what the industry is seeing, changes in vulnerabilities. They even have stuff related to IoT on the OWASP Top 10 as well. I mean, the OWASP website, they've got information related to that as well. And they offer a lot of different free tools too. OWASP does. There's OWASP Zap, which is a web application vulnerability scanner. So this is it right here, Z Attack Proxy. So this is a free application that they create that's available for people to use for their web app pen testing. And there's a commercial tool similar to this called Burp Suite.
Yes.
Yeah, and Burp Suite's
Yeah,
like,
I just installed
good.
installed it yesterday.
Yeah, Burp Suite is a good one to learn. It's pretty much the industry standard. So if you're wanting to work in application security or web app pen testing, it's good to know that. But OWASP Zap is a good free tool.
Yeah, I installed it on a VM.
Okay.
And so far it's behaving okay.
Yeah. There's some good resources out there on how to use it as well. Then Juice Shop is a vulnerable application. We'll be going over that some. So it's a vulnerable web application that you can go through and practice on. So it's a way for you to practice testing OWASP top 10.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and put that in there, but you can find that. Yeah, so I just kind of go out there and look around on the OWASP website. And then there's the OWASP testing guide that shows you how to, helps with, let's see. So there's even a mobile security testing guide. And so here's the web security testing guide. And so this is a really good resource there. A lot of companies, for their methodology for a web app pen test, they'll use like the OWASP testing guide and then the web application hackers handbook methodology. Those are two very popular methodologies that are used for web app pen testing. So you have any questions?
Wait a minute, what did you say the two methods that they use for?
Yes, one is the OWASP testing guide.
Okay.
Which is the OWASP security testing guide. And then the web application hackers handbook, which that's the class textbook that you're using.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So those are the two popular methodologies. I did a pen test for Bug Crowd because bug bounty companies got in, some of them got in a little later in the game than others, but bug bounties is kind of like a pen test, although you're paid for the bugs you find. But with a pen test, you're paid for the pen test. So companies like Bug Crowd, like in 2019, they started offering pen tests.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the methodologies that they use are the OWASP testing guide and the web application hackers handbook. But the OWASP testing guide is really, really widely used. And real quick, I'll bring up, this is another good resource that it's really good for using in the labs. This is based on the book. So instead of updating the web application hackers handbook, and web application hackers handbook, one of the authors is one of the creators of the tool Burp Suite. So instead of updating the book, they built this website instead. And so this has different learning materials on here. So you can go through, sign up. It's totally free. You can use Burp Suite against that, even OWASP Zap to go in here and do these different items. And see, they also have like labs associated with each one of these lessons. So you go through, you do your SQL injection lesson. There's even like a video on it. And then as you scroll down, there's labs. So here's a lab. So you go in here and your lab's online. So you go through and you access the lab. It brings up a web page, but you have to be logged in here. But like I said, it's free to sign up. But you access the lab and you can perform these different lab exercises.
Oh.
So that's a real good one. So I mean, this would take you from beginner web app pen tester to very advanced. So it's kind of, it'll take you from beginner to, expert. So yeah, that's a really good one there. And if you see over here in the side, you can see all the different topics. So they're covering the different types of, and so this is their methodology is more in line, but they do have SQL injection. There's different types of injection. And so this would be, more, I guess I'd have to say, there's OWASP top 10 stuff in here, but this is the people that wrote the Web Application Hackers Handbook. So their methodology, maybe laid out more towards the way their methodology works, but still relevant. And, these are different, these things map to the OWASP top 10.